advance, this is going to be quite a sort of black and white set of slides on how to, or what needs to go into a clinical trial protocol. So June 1996, International Conference on Harmonization on Technical Requirements for Pharmaceuticals for Human Use, Guidelines for Good Clinical Practice, or GCP. So this is an internationally agreed standard for the design, conduct, performance, monitoring, auditing, recording, analysing and reporting of clinical trials that basically ensures that there's ethical and scientific quality for designing and reporting trials that involve human subjects. So this is of paramount importance so that trial participants have their safety protected. And it's a framework that ensures that the results are credible and accurate, and that the rights and integrity and confidentiality of trial participants are protected throughout the life cycle of a clinical trial. So this isn't a GCP course. So when one's involved in clinical trial conduct, one normally goes on a GCP course, which is usually a day or 2 days, with a really comprehensive view of good clinical practice. So I'm just going to detail the sort of 13 main points of GCP. So these clinical trials should be conducted in accordance with the ethical principles that have the origin in the Declaration of Helsinki, that are consistent with GCP, and applicable regulatory requirements, which will differ in different geographical jurisdictions. So in this talk, I'm not going to go too much into the regulatory requirements because they're different in different countries around the world and complicated. Clinical trials should obviously be conducted in ways that ensure the rights, safety, and well-being of trial participants. That goes without saying. And there should be available non-clinical and clinical information on the investigational product, which should be adequate to support why the clinical trial is being done in the first place. Voluntary, well-informed consent is paramount. It's an integral feature of the ethical conduct of a clinical trial. And clinical trials should be subject to an institutional review board and review by an ethics committee. That is mandatory. They should be scientifically sound for their intended purposes and based on robust scientific knowledge. And they should be designed and conducted by qualified individuals who have been adequately trained, and that all needs to be documented. Quality needs to be built into the scientific and operational design and conduct of clinical trials. And processes and approaches and measures should be proportionate to the risks to participants and reliability of trial results. And that differs depending on what kind of trial it is that you're running. Clinical trials should be designed in a clear, concise, and operationally feasible protocol, and they should generate reliable results. The roles, tasks, and responsibilities of the clinical trial should be clear and documented appropriately. And investigational products used in clinical trials should be manufactured in accordance with GMP standards. So, a clinical trial protocol, as defined in ICH GCP, is a legal document that basically describes objectives, design, methodology, conduct, statistical considerations, analysis, and organisation of a clinical trial. And many organisations have trial templates, and if you don't have one, then I'm sure other organisations internationally would be happy to share them if your institution doesn't have one. And they're often very helpful to make sure that you don't forget anything. So who writes the clinical trial protocol? So this is the responsibility of the chief investigator to supervise the writing, but involves collaborations with other people. For example, we're going to hear in a minute about statistics. It might involve research scientists, medical writers, and other investigators that are involved in the running of the trial. And it's the responsibility of the sponsor to ensure adequate peer review has been conducted. So this is the title page of a trial that I was involved with the writing of about 8 years ago, which was basically looking at an application to see if patients could self-manage side effects from an oral chemotherapy drug we use for breast cancer called capecitabine. So what needs to be on the title page? So the trial title, and sometimes also a short version of that, and the trial number, version dates and amendment dates, the name and address of the sponsor, chief investigator, collaborators, and the trial management team, and how you can get in touch with them. The person that's authorised to sign the protocol and protocol amendments. Details of who's funded the trial. Medical expert who's involved if appropriate. And details of clinical laboratories and other technical departments that are involved. And there should be some form of confidentiality statement and the relevant signatures. Then there's usually a contents page, which details all the subsequent required sections with page numbers. And there's usually a header and footer, which has got version number for control purposes. Then it's quite helpful to have a protocol synopsis. This is often in the form of a table, which just at a glance shows you what the protocol's about, has a lay summary in it, which is really important, and has just got the salient features of the study laid out. And also a list of abbreviations that are used in the trial, that's used in the protocol, is often very helpful. Then the next section should be about the background of the study. So this depends on the type of study that it is, but it should involve writing about the disease of interest, who the population is that you're studying, and a current literature review, which has led you to why you're doing this study. If an investigatory investigational medicinal product, an IMP, is involved, then details of the chemical structure should be there, preclinical data, earlier phase data, and a summary of known risks to humans and benefits. There should be a rationale with a reference, description, and justification for the route, administration, dosage, regimen, treatment period, etc. And there should be a statement saying that it's going to be compliant with the protocol and GCP and applicable regulatory requirements, and a full description of the study population that you're going to be studying. Then the next section should have a hypothesis. So this is a predetermined declaration regarding the research question, where the investigator makes a precise sort of educated guess about what the study outcome is going to be. So different types of trials. You can have interventional trials where participants are put into different groups to find out more about the effect of an intervention, such as radiation and a device or an IMP. And broadly speaking, trials of IMPs involve phase 1 trials, which predominantly look at safety, phase 2 trials, which mainly look at efficacy, phase 3 trials, which mainly look at efficacy compared to existing treatments, and then phase 4 studies, which are post-approval surveillance studies. And then, as well as those interventional studies, you can also have observational studies, which you might be writing a protocol for, which basically investigate what happens to people in different situations. So observational studies are where research teams don't influence what treatments people have. So examples of these involve studies like cohort studies, which look at different groups of people over time, quite useful for looking at risk factors for diseases like cancer. Case control studies, where you recruit people who have a disease, people who don't have a disease, or control groups, and then you look back to see how many people in each group were exposed to certain factors. And then cross-sectional studies, where you look at a snapshot in time. So the next bit that your protocol should have in it is aims and objectives. And this obviously varies depending on what the type and phase of the trial is. But you should at least have primary objectives and secondary objectives. And these will inform your endpoints, which we'll come on to in a minute. So study design, it's quite helpful to have a sort of at-a-glance time event matrix. I've just put an example of one on the right, where you put a framework for the schematic design and what you're going to do when you're going to do various laboratory tests, when you're going to take informed consent. And this should detail really from the far left, from screening to various time points across the trial. Methods to avoid bias should be described in this section. The expected duration of the trial period, including washout periods, follow-up periods, what the trial setting is this being done in primary care? Is it a hospital-based study? What countries are going to be included in the study? You should describe the treatment, sample handling, and the length of the study and stopping rules. Then there should be a section if it's a study of an IMP. There should be a section on the IMP. So how is it formulated? All about the packaging, labeling, confirm the marketing authorization status, dosage, route, timing, what lifestyle adjustments, when somebody's allowed to eat and drink around taking the medication, information about contraception, alcohol, smoking, etc. Study drug storage. Drug accountability, very important, what drug has been dispensed and how you're going to account for what's left over. Concomitant medication that's allowed. Monitoring of treatment compliance. This is often done in the form of a patient diary, which the monitors will, which you as an HCP will look at when patients come to clinic, and state if there'll be provision of the IMP beyond the study period, which is really important. So if the drug is shown to work, our patient's going to have access to the drug at the end of the trial. And you must also describe non-IMPs that are used in the study. Then you need to state the trial endpoints, so primary and secondary endpoints, and these again will vary from that feasibility study on the capecitabine app that I showed you at the beginning. Of our primary endpoint for that was patient acceptability. Another study, for example, that I've been involved with was a phase 1 study of a steroid sulfatase inhibitor in postmenopausal women with metastatic breast cancer. And our primary endpoint for that was looking at what the dose was of the drug that inhibited the enzyme that we were looking at in peripheral blood lymphocytes by over 90%. So they're hugely different depending on what kind of study it is you're running. And you need to describe the primary and secondary measures that will be used to determine the efficacy of the treatment and describe participant safety measures that you're going to incorporate into your trial. Then the next section of the protocol should be about participant selection. So you need to write down your inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria. And the exclusion criteria aren't simply a corollary of the inclusion criteria. So for inclusion, we need to include things like what disease are you studying, the gender of the person, prior treatment constraints, etc. Exclusion criteria might be previous treatments that they've had that might exclude them, lab constraints, or any other reasons that are pertinent to the study. Where you're going to recruit patients from, and screening procedures that are going to enable you to determine whether somebody is suitable for being entered into the study. You need to specify exactly the duration between screening and registration and or randomization, and what your consent procedures are going to be. Then there should be a section on randomization if it's a randomized study, how it's going to be performed. So there are 4 main ways of randomization, for example, stratification, minimization, block allocation, or simply tossing a coin, and how you're going to implement that. Who's going to design the randomization schedule, when randomization occurs, and how new participants might be highlighted. If it's a blinded trial, who is blinded to the allocation, and describe the steps to conceal allocation, and who and how an allocation code might be broken. So really, when you're thinking about writing your protocol, you've got to think about every single issue that could come up and make sure that's accounted for and is described in the protocol so that you don't then get queries. And then you need to detail about early discontinuation or participant withdrawal. So the circumstances by which a participant can be withdrawn if they themselves decide that they want to be withdrawn, which they have a right to at any time, or if the investigator wants to withdraw them. So for example, if they are found to subsequently be ineligible, if the patient becomes pregnant, if there's a non-compliance with the protocol, a huge protocol deviation, an adverse event that requires discontinuation, or progressive disease being examples of that. And you also need to detail if you're going to replace that participant that's withdrawn and how you're going to do that. Then you should have a section on data acquisition. So this is a statement that the investigators and institution will allow trial-related monitoring, audits, REC review, so research ethics committee review, regulatory inspections by enabling access to source data and other documents. So that statement's got to go in there. There needs to be a statement on data protection and on participant confidentiality, and what comprises source documents. Then there needs to be a section on study organization. So firstly, on the data monitoring committee, so what's that composed of and what the function is, how often that committee is going to meet. The committee chair should be independent from the trial, incidentally, and lay members are encouraged. So you need to have a section on adverse events, SUSARs, serious adverse reactions, and serious adverse events with definitions of what they are and how you're going to report them. This needs to be documented in the CRF, the duration, the grading, the outcome, the causality, and it all needs to be reported in accordance with your SOP, your standard operating procedure. You need to have a section on protocol violations, so significant protocol requirements that are not adhered to and how you're going to deal with those. And there should be an SOP in place which describes how these are identified, escalated, and assessed. And serious breaches are defined as a breach of good clinical practice or trial protocol that's likely to affect to a significant degree either the safety of physical or mental integrity of the subject of the trial or the scientific value of the trial. Then I know we're going to have a session in a minute about statistical considerations, but there must be a section on this in your protocol. The sample size rationale, your power calculation and randomization, as we've just discussed, the level of significance that's to be used in all analyses, procedures for accounting for missing, unused or spurious data, definition of which data sets you're going to analyze, descriptions of the methods of analysis for your primary and secondary endpoints, which are going to be your planned interim analyses, if any, and what's the timing of those, all needs to be specified, and procedures for reporting deviations from your original statistical plan. And sometimes it's appropriate to have a health economics analysis as well in this section. There needs to be a section on regulatory and ethics committee approval, all according to the Declaration of Helsinki. You need to state that you're not going to start the trial until all regulatory approvals are in place. You need to state that any protocol amendments are going to be submitted to the relevant regulatory authorities along the study duration, and that GCP is going to be adhered to throughout. And any other ethical considerations that are specific to your particular trial, for example, involvement of vulnerable patient groups and how that's going to be managed. And confidentiality. So again, the legislation around that is different in different jurisdictions. In the UK, we have GDPR, or General Data Protection Regulation, which is an EU requirement. Then there needs to be a section on data handling and record keeping, monitoring, which instruments you're going to use to collect your data. Is your CRF, your case report form, going to be electronic, or is it going to be in a paper format? There should be a validated database. You need to describe if your data is going to be anonymized or pseudo-anonymized. Data management procedures, when's the data lock going to happen? Data quality and reporting processes, how you're going to clean your data, data completeness methods, quality control measures, and what happens to archival data. How are you going to safeguard your database? How long are you going to retain data? How long is it going to be stored for, etc. All needs to be detailed. There needs to be a section on financing, indemnity, and insurance. So you need to describe how the trial is going to be financed. That needs to be transparent. How the trial, what the insurance or indemnification is going to be for the trial. You need to detail about expenses and benefits for trial participants and details of intellectual property rights if appropriate. And it's also quite good at the outset to detail what the publication policy is going to be. So where and how the trial results are going to be disseminated, and how are you going to prepare your paper submission and who's going to be involved. It's quite good politically to state that up front. And then you need to finish off with a section on references, which relates back to your background section, and appendices, which details things like your patient information sheet. So thank you for listening. That's a sort of whiz through the minimum requirements that you need to have in your protocol. Hope that was helpful. Thank you very much.